I understand how difficult it is for deconstruction to take place. It's not easy. It's like we've been programmed by these doctrines and theological things for years and years. If we've been around Christian things for a long time, I mean, I was going to church since I was 2, Sunday school and everything else. I mean, I absorbed a lot of things and I heard a lot of things and I was programmed by a lot of things, so it takes time for people to become deprogrammed. And if they don't have the experiences, it's really hard because an experience will challenge a belief. But if they don't have the experiences, then you're trying to change a belief with another belief. So they're just substituting beliefs, which aren't testimony. A belief in something is not a testimony of it. And people need to have testimonies of God's love, testimonies of engaging with God, experiencing him speaking to them, him giving them revelation, him showing them things which do totally challenge their theological perspective and their beliefs.
So today is Labor Day. It's a federal holiday in the U.S. And obviously labor connotates, you have to do something, you have to earn your wages. So, obviously with this Kingdom era, we've been talking about, the grace gift of God and not works, but, freely received gift from the Lord. I feel like a lot of people are recognizing that the church has left the building. You look at websites and it says these are our core values for this church, and I look at them now and I'm thinking, why do we have these core values here? If I don't comply with them, then I don't belong at this church. And so anyway, I've been recently, I had this revelation that I get asked a lot of time, Ben, what church do you go to? And my reply now is I go to the church of right here and right now. And it kind of startles people, but I feel like that is where the Lord is taking us into that deep, intimate relationship. Wherever we go, he's with us. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. It's Labor Day here, and in the kingdom of God, with our relationship with the Lord, there is no wages that we need to earn. And
that's totally true. Yeah. I think there's a lot of things within the Christian community which is very much based in, are we there yet? How do we get there? What do we do to get there? And you're going round and round, more performance to discover actually the truth of what is already there and already there. We're already there. We just need to come from a there perspective, not a how do you get there perspective. And of course, all religion and churches promote programs that help you get there. Now, there's a sense where, you're helping people learn things that will help them on their journey, which is fine. But the reality is the perspective in which you view things will determine a lot of how that's outworked. And if you view that you need to do things to accomplish something, to enable you to get somewhere or be someone, particularly, I think identity is the key, then you're going to be pressured into performance and be subject to manipulation by others, whether it be church or everything else, for that performance, so that you are accepted by God and the church and the denomination. And again, beliefs determine whether you're accepted or not, and behaviors determine whether you're accepted or not. And therefore, there's a lot of pressure, therefore, to believe and to behave like the norm. And we're all uniquely and wonderfully made so that we have a relationship which is independent of our beliefs and our behavior. Now, obviously, if you have a relationship with God and you are becoming like him by the renewal of your mind, then you are going to behave more and more like he behaves. Love, out of love. And ultimately, I think that's the key that sets us free. If we know we're unconditionally loved, then we don't have to work for it, which is very challenging to the religious mindset, because we've been conditioned to work for something. Even though we've been taught we live by grace, actually most people who are flowing in Christianity or functioning in Christianity actually function by works. And read your Bible, pray every day, witness, tithe, offer, give, do this, serve in the church, on and on and on and on. All of the criteria that sort of formulated to get you to perform and keep that performance going. And so many Christians are just going round and round and round and round. They're not really getting anywhere because they don't know who they are, and therefore they're not functioning out of their identity and their position. We are already in that position. We don't have to accomplish something to outwork that position. We are in that position. Now, discovering our identity, which unveils the position of sonship that we're in, enables us to outwork our sonship. But the opposite has been true. We have to do something to accomplish our sonship. Now, I do believe in maturing and growing, but that comes from our relationship deepening. Therefore, if we deepen our relationship with the Father, we will deepen our understanding of our identity as sons. So it's all relational, which means God is not looking for us to do something to enable us to be someone that we already are. He just wants to reveal the vast sum of his thoughts to us so that we'll discover who we already are. And it's like, in the car traveling with children, it's like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? When are we going to get there? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And ultimately with God, we're already there. We already are the righteousness of God in Christ. So if we're coming from that perspective, that's going to enable us to live from who we are rather than for who we are. And identity for most people is based in what they do. Well, who are you? Well, I'm a fireman, I'm a policeman, I'm a teacher, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a Christian. Yeah, the reality is they're all based on what we do and what we believe rather than who we are. And God says we are his children, and creation is longing and waiting for the revealing of those sons so that creation can be set free from its bondage to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And we need to be free from those works and from that labor. And the word evil in Greek, oneros, means hardship, toil, and labor. It's not actually to do with the wickedness of the world. It's to do with working for your identity, which puts you in toil, which was what came out of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The walk of independence was you don't know who you are anymore because you've left the source of that identity, which was the Father, to follow your own path to identity, which has now become works, orientated. And unfortunately, people have been caught up in that from that source. And God has been trying to reveal our identity all the way through. But we keep rejecting the free gift of his grace and mercy and love to work for it, whether that be through a religious or a educational or a position or, economy. All of that gives people a sense of identity and a sense of security, which actually all collapses at some point in life, and people realize they don't know who they are. Celebrating, Labor Day is quite funny, isn't it?
Kind of is.
It's like, we're celebrating that we're a country of workers. Yay, great. No, I'm not against actually doing a job or doing it well and outworking something, in life. I'm not against any of that, but none of that gives you your identity. That's an outworking of your identity. And people are most happy when they're doing something that reflects who they are. And some people are just in a job because they need money, and they really struggle in that job because they don't enjoy it. It's not fulfilling. It's not satisfying. because they're doing it for the wrong reason, you know. And when you do something that you enjoy and is really part of who you are, it's sort of an outworking of who you are, then you find life is much more joyful, and you are living so much more of an attitude of thanksgiving and gratitude, because you're just expressing yourself and being yourself, you know. I think, you know, a few years ago when people started to talk about destiny and scrolls of destiny and finding out what their mandate was and who are they, what's their blueprint for life, you know, they all wanted to know what it was so they could try and fulfill it. And the reality is, as soon as you try and fulfill something, it's counterproductive, because you're trying to do something which contradicts the reality of the freedom that you have in knowing who you are, you know. And a lot of people then wanted to see their scroll and what's on my scroll, and, you know, what's my destiny. And actually the scroll and destiny are just basically an outworking of this is who you are. So your scroll revealed who you are and revealed your destiny to be a son of God, so you could outwork that destiny every day in your life, without having to have a list of instructions to tell you what to do. So then you could be secure because you knew what to do and you wouldn't get it wrong. And people didn't want to get it wrong because they were afraid that if they got it wrong, God would in some way disapprove. So they strive to get it right and the perfect will of God, as if there was only one thing that we could be in life. And God has wanted us to be free to express ourselves as his sons, made in his image, to be creative, not to be restricted by the set of rules or regulations, but to be in a relationship which would create the desire to outwork love. As we've been loved, we're empowered to love, you know, which is so different from most of what you'll get from the religious systems, which will all be trying to conform you to a set of beliefs and a behavioral outworking of those beliefs so that you fit in, so you're accepted. And they tell you that God only accepts you if you behave, which puts people in fear and therefore susceptible to manipulation. You know, give more. God will be pleased with you if you give more. Yeah, well, God will be pleased with you if you give what he wants you to give. He won't be impressed if you try and give more to impress him, or less, because you're afraid of giving. And all these things all tie together with the relationship. So if we're in relationship with the Father, then we begin to know the Father's heart, and then we can outwork the Father's heart through who we are, because God has made us creative to choose the way we outwork the Father's heart. It isn't prescriptive, you know. And people feel when there's this sort of sovereignty of God, there is the perfect will of God for my life. There's only one person I can marry. There's only one of this. Got to do it this way. Got to get it right. They're in this stress, you know, where God wants them to enjoy and be free.
Well, I do have a question. It's kind of an awkward question. I've been thinking about if you can tell us, what do angels do, number one, in our lives, and how do they do that? Now, how do they do these things? I can't really put my finger on it.
Okay.
Do you have any idea?
Well, angels, according to Hebrews, are ministering spirits on behalf of those who are heirs of salvation. So they're involved in our lives before we come to the knowledge of who we are, and they're also involved after we come to the knowledge of who we are. So they're assigned to us to protect us. So they're guardian angels, so-called, who are alongside us to help us discover our identity in sonship. And then they're there to help us outwork that identity in sonship. So they can protect us. And there are lots of physical stories of angels saving people from physical harm, because they're there to try and help and guide and keep us from harm. They're there to be involved in our outworking who we are. So if we have something that we believe the Father desires us to be involved with, angels are there to help us in that involvement. Angels are not going to want to help us if we're doing our own thing, because they know our own thing is going to get us into a problematic situation. So they're not going to help us do things which are going to be contradictory to us being blessed. So they want us to be blessed, and they want to help us in that blessing. So we can work and cooperate with the angels. They can work with us. We can assign them tasks. So we can assign them things in everyday life to help us outwork our identity in everyday life. So often they don't want to draw attention to themselves. So it's not like they stand in front of us, obscuring our view of God or life. They're usually behind us or alongside us because they want us to be focused fully on our relationship with God, and they're there to help us in that relationship with God. There are earthly angels and there are heavenly angels. So there are angels that are assigned around our lives in this dimension, in which you can engage with them, talk to them, interact with them. Sometimes they may become visible physically. Most of the time they're only visible spiritually, but you can engage with them, see them, and talk to them and communicate with them. You know, they're not there to replace God, and they're not there unless God gives them something to tell us. Generally, God will speak to us. But sometimes they may well have something that can be a message, because there are messenger angels like Gabriel and others in the Bible that came with a message. And God may still use angels at times, but I think more and more, because he's working in everybody and he is in everybody to outwork and reveal himself, he wants to do it relationally, not through a third party. So I would say the use of angels in the Old Testament is much less than the use of angels subsequent to people becoming aware the Holy Spirit is in them, that Jesus is working in them. There were angels that were used in the transition. You know, we have Peter sort of rescued because God sent angels to rescue him because people were praying. So people were praying for Peter's freedom from prison, and God sent an angel to loose him from his chains. So there are actually very practical things there that angels could do if we can't do them ourselves. Once you begin to know your identity and your authority, there are things you can do that an angel could do for you, but you're now in a position of maturity where you can do for yourself. So I was in New Zealand once, and I was teaching on angels and interaction with the supernatural realm and things. And was in Auckland. It was raining heavily. And I was one of the last out. And when I got out, everyone was behind a locked gate because the car park gate had been locked. The caretaker had obviously gone home, forgotten that there were people in the building, locked the gate, and all the people were stuck in the car park. And so there were a whole load of them all lined up waiting to get out. And at the front of the queue, there were two ladies. One was a Hindu lady, I think, or a Sikh lady, I think. And the other one was a person who didn't yet believe. And they'd been invited to the meeting by their boss, who was my host. And they came. And then, so I went to find out what's going on. Why are you stuck there? And they said, oh, the gate is locked. We can't get out. We tried the gate. It's locked. We can't get out. And then they said to me with a smile and a bit of a twinkle in their eye, could you ask one of those angels you were talking about to open the gate for us? You know, and they were joking, really. But they were also a little bit hopeful, I think, because bottom line is I talked about angel stories, so they were sort of primed. So I immediately just felt the Father's heart. No, you open the gate for them. So I said, look, okay, we won't need an angel here. I'll open the gate. And they said, oh, no, it's locked. So I went up to the gate, chose to open the lock. So I just opened the padlock without the key and opened the gate, and they all drove out. So there could have been an angel, But actually, in that situation, I could easily do it myself. So I chose to do it myself. So how do they do things? Well, in lots of different ways. Sometimes they help with us connecting with people. So we bump into someone, or seemingly our paths cross with people. And sometimes angels can communicate and help in that process. Sometimes angels do very sort of things. I mean, I've assigned my angel to go and get me a parking space when I needed a parking space. So I assumed that the angel went and stood in the place and people just didn't see it or avoided it for some reason. Because when I get into the car park, there's a space. Then I'll thank my angels for what they've done. So I'm grateful and thankful for them. Now, it says we will judge angels. Now, people got this view that judging angels is like, oh, that's the bad angels, and we're going to assign them to a destruction or something. Where actually, judgment is a verdict. So well done, thank you, is a judgment. So when angels do things for us, thank them. Make that judgment on, well done, you did a great job, thank you. Really appreciate it. Then you build a relationship, which they're not their slaves. They're there to, in relationship, work with us and cooperate with us in outworking God's purposes. There I found a heavenly angel that was assigned to my mountain and the throne that I didn't know that I had. Well, I sort of knew that I had spiritually, we're all seated in Christ with heavenly places, but I never really actually realized it was a place that I could engage in. And when I engaged, and there's a throne, I sat on the throne and started learning about mountains and thrones and ruling and declaring and decreeing from my position in heaven where I was seated, and didn't really think any more about it. I'm not really that much for what things look like. So a throne is somewhere I sit and rule. It's not, I don't really bother whether it's wood or gold or whatever it is. As long as I can sit on it and rule, that's all I care about. And then I started taking people to see their thrones. And one day I was sort of leading an activation and saying, hey, close your eyes and here's your, picture your mountain and your throne and go and visit it and go and be seated. And Jesus will come and enthrone you and he'll give you a crown and a scepter. And I was there looking, and I looked at my own throne, and there was this big angel standing behind it. So I said, well, who are you? And he said, well, I'm the angel, your heavenly angel that's been there to protect your position, and I've been here. And it's literally, I never noticed because I never looked. So I said, well, what do you do? He said, well, what do you want me to do? I'm here to help you. So then I started asking questions about what I was to do from my position, being seated in heavenly places. Now, I could have done that a year earlier or more if I'd sort of thought about it, but I never really thought about it. I just was getting on with doing stuff. But then when I saw it, I realized that angel had been involved my whole life in helping me come to a position where eventually I would be seated where I am effectively in the spirit and begin to engage it. And so I did. So literally then I started to engage that angel, and that angel helped me understand the processes of change and transformation and growth and maturity in cycles of engaging with God, receiving a revelation of the nature of God and that changing you, and then taking you through the cycle of where the chancellor's houses are aligned for the outworking of our maturity and growth. And I didn't realize that, but then I sort of talked to the angel and realized the angel had been involved quite a number of times in my life, particularly when I was younger, and the angel had been involved in releasing revelation. I came across books that challenged my life and really sort of turbocharged things and moved things on and accelerated things a lot. That angel had been responsible for me coming across a book. And then I would read the book, and then I would receive something about the nature of God, which would be life-changing, and then that would take me on a cycle of change. And I realized the angel was there to help me with cycles in change until I matured that I could engage those cycles myself, which I learned to do. So ultimately, the angels are involved in helping us mature And when we get to a position of maturity, we sort of need them less. But there are a number of obviously heavenly angels or beings that I've engaged with over the years that have been very helpful. Wisdom, prudence, they've helped me a lot in discovering truth and revelation and opening opportunities, showing me particular places I could engage in heaven, showing me some of how heaven works, some of the government of heaven, how the courts work, how the Chancellor's Court and the Court of Kings, Court of Scribes, how these courts function. Wisdom took me to several courts and showed me how they worked, and then encouraged me to operate using those courts. Now, we're talking courts, more assemblies, and rather than legal courts. But I received revelation and learned how to function, usually in those early days, through God assigning an angel to show me. In latter times, there have been less of angelic involvement because I've spent more and more time in the presence of the Father. That's been heart-to-heart revelation of the Father, that I know his heart rather than needing someone to go and show me something. The Father just reveals it, and it's more infused knowledge that comes from a relationship with the Father. But in my journey, the angels have been very helpful.
I have a question.
Yep.
So I've been reading the Courts of Heaven by Robert Henderson just to understand his perspective on the courts. Like that's,
yeah,
because I know quite a bit was different from what you've taught. Oh, by the way, thanks for those stories, because I've used them in my own journey about with angels asking for help with things, like when I locked myself out of my car. That was funny. Anyway, in 1 Kings 22:19-23, it's a story of where Satan, or where the Lord is sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven are standing by, and he wants to deal with Ahab. And the Lord said, "Who will persuade Ahab to go up that he may fall at Ramoth Gilead?" And so then there's so he says all the hosts of heaven are there. And then one spirit says that he will go be a lying spirit in the mouth of the prophets. Now, that almost sounds to me like maybe a fallen angel. Do you think that the fallen angels are also part of the host of heaven? That a fallen angel would go and do this? Because even in Job, it talks about that Satan is able to come into the presence of the Father in heaven.
Yeah, there are places where that can take place, and there are places where it can't take place. So in the realm of our realm, in the kingdom of God realm, there are different courts, accusation courts, and other things where the enemy has access, where there can be accusations meant and other things. Now, when it comes to some of these stories and some of the issues around the sort of the courts of heaven and that type of thing, they're sort of told in a form which is how they describe them. Okay, so Kings was written from their perspective. Where did they get that revelation from? Well, obviously they weren't there, so either someone told them so they could record it, because they weren't there, were they? Now, a prophet could have heard from God and then told someone, this is what God told me. And then they write it down, but they write it down often in a way that comes out of their understanding of God.
Yeah.
So in the Old Testament, their understanding of God was undifferentiated from good and bad, the devil and God. So the devil did good, bad things for God, really, rather than, well, no, the devil didn't cooperate with God because he was in against what God's purposes were. But God used, obviously, some of what the devil did to bring something out of it. But that doesn't mean that God said to the devil, go and kill these people. The devil did that on his own because he was a murderer from the beginning, a liar. So he's always wanting to rob, kill, and destroy. So God didn't assign him to rob, kill, and destroy. People and what they did opened up the opportunity for reaping what they had sowed, and then the devil took that opportunity of bringing about negative things in people's lives. But the Hebrews recorded it as if God did it.
Mm-hmm.
But God didn't do it. So some of those stories may well be a reflection of their view of what happened, that the sort of fallen angel, whichever one it was, whatever, came before God, and actually God then assigned it. But I don't believe that's actually what happened, but it could be the way they saw it happening.
Yeah.
Therefore, I don't necessarily believe the reports of the Old Testament are necessarily totally what God dictated to them. So were prophets giving false prophecy? Yep. We know there are a whole load of prophets of Baal who were obviously prophesying things which weren't coming from God, but they're called prophets, but they weren't following God. They were following some fallen being who was giving them information to prophesy with. We know Balaam and the whole story there. And, you know, so in a sense, I would not be really looking to get my revelation through things written in the Old Testament. Now, there are some things that, you know, we often use Joshua, the high priest, you know, coming before God and being throned and God giving him a verdict and whatever, as one that talks about the courts. And that may well be a reflection of the mobile court of accusation. It doesn't talk about the devil being there or anything else, but it is talking about something happening when someone comes before a court. I personally, I don't know Robert Henderson. I've listened to a couple of his things. I've not got any books of his. I do believe there's this big issue over whether everything is finished or whether we need to be involved in things being completed or outworked. So there's this sort of one way of looking at it. Well, it's the finished work of Jesus. Why do we need to do all this cleansing our DNA and doing all this if we're new creations? Well, we may be a new creation, but if we don't know it and there are lies which are stopping us coming into that knowledge, then those things need to be dealt with, and God will help us deal with those things so that we can know the truth and live in the truth. But I would in general not be really looking to build a theology of how we operate in the New Testament and in the new covenant out of the old covenant, because I think we can run in all sorts of ideas which can get us into trouble, because they're coming from a different perspective, and they're coming from a different religious perspective and totally different belief about God. So when the prophets did start to come and God started to talk to them about the new covenant that was coming, getting them in preparation for Jesus's coming, they started saying things which were really contradictory to things that had been thought before or written before. Like, you know, God didn't want sacrifices and offerings. So what have you been doing this last 2,000 years? You know, it's like God didn't want it. David had that revelation because he really had more of a connection to the heart of God, you know, which was more a contrite heart is all you're looking for, you know. So there was these sort of revelations that began to change their view of who God was. So their view in the beginning, right at the beginning, God wanted us to give him an offering. So he wanted us to kill a lamb or give him crops or whatever. So you had Cain's offering of works and you had Abel's offering of a lamb. Well, it says in Hebrews that Abel offered a better sacrifice. It was what God wanted. It was just not done in works. But it didn't mean it was right. And we read into that, oh, God wanted him to give this lamb. Well, nowhere did it record that. It just declared that he did it by faith, believing that it was a good thing to do. And so God accepted it because he operated in faith. But God didn't want him to give a sacrifice of an animal any more than he wanted Cain to give a sacrifice of his crops. But they were both religious systems that they set up from their own lack of relationship with God. But we read them and think one's better than the other. Well, in one sense, you could say Abel's was not works of his hands, but it doesn't mean that God wanted sacrifices. So we've got to be careful how we interpret those things. So I wouldn't personally be building my understanding out of those things I see written there, because I think you can then run into problems, because you can run into problems like thinking, oh, so the fallen angels serve God and God assigns them to go and do bad things. Well, no, he doesn't. They do that on their own quite easily.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I like that perspective, because as a person who has raised animals, chickens and sheep and goats and all of that, there's a lot of work involved in that. So, it's hard when people say that it wasn't the work of Abel's hands. It's hard for me to actually agree with that.
Yeah.
There's
Look after
a lot of work involved in that.
Yeah.
But the fact that he felt he needed to give a blood sacrifice, I mean, who is it that requires blood sacrifices? Who's still requiring blood sacrifices?
Yeah.
And not any, Yeshua isn't, or God, the Father that we serve isn't, but there is a quote unquote little God who is still requiring blood sacrifices still. So that's an interesting topic. So Robert comes from I don't know whether it was his own revelation about the courts or not, but he sure has done a lot of ministry out of it. But my biggest thing with him is that he sees the throne room of God, which is one of the reasons is because of this very passage, the Lord sitting on his throne. So he sees the throne room as a courtroom. Yeah. And, the teachings that I've gotten from you and Ian, I don't see the courtroom as a throne room, but I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
Well, ultimately, God is seated in many different places from many different perspectives. So we have the throne where the river of fire, where the Ancient of Days is seated and Jesus is seated next to him. We have the Revelation 5 and, sort of big throne room, thunders and lightnings and sea of glass and 4 living creatures and all of that. So we have quite a lot of different things. We have, different places that I see. We have the throne described in Isaiah 6, where the Lord is in the throne with the train of his robe filling the temple, and there being an altar there, and there being, all that. Well, all those things are descriptions of aspects that are outworkings of who God is as king. And I think they're sort of there to help us navigate through our relationship and our growth in maturity in it. I don't think Robert Henderson has actually been into heaven, not from the way I understand what he talks about. Because when I have done court cases in a larger setting, people who've taken Robert Henderson's teaching and others, actually, they just set up a courtroom in the room as if it is heaven, and it very clearly isn't. So what he's doing is he's introducing a form of prayer. Yeah. And that's how he's got an audience with an evangelical community and charismatic community, because he's teaching this is a way of praying judicially, which I don't disagree with in principle, because we should have authority and see God in a way judging on our behalf. But it isn't like, oh, well, we're just going to pray and then this is how it's going to happen. You have to go and engage it. And you have to go and engage that place to be able to outwork that. People were starting to do it as, oh, well, this is just a new way of thinking about prayer.
Well, I think
he get that revelation.
I think he sees it as an extension of intercession. He sees it as intercession hasn't always brought the results that we thought, that the intercessor thought he wanted. So now if you use the courtrooms of heaven, but he does, I haven't made it all the way through this book yet, and I've had it for years because I didn't really like his approach, but he, oh, now I forgot my thought. But he does talk about getting your house clean. In other words, dealing with your own bloodline and he does talk about that at least a little bit. And then he's talking about all these voices that are in the heavens, and I'm like, yeah, it just never has seemed to me, because I was actually in a meeting with him, and personally he came to Idaho, and it didn't seem to me like it was his revelation, that he picked up on somebody else's revelation and has done great things with it. But yeah, I agree. I don't know that he's really entered in and engaged it. I don't see that necessarily.
No, I don't think he's coming from a mystic perspective or a seated in heavenly places, and therefore we can engage these realms and function in the realms of heaven in this way.
Yeah.
But it does carry some authority in helping people understand that this is a judicial and not a warfare process.
Right.
And
right.
therefore using your authority is going to be a good thing. Now, in reality, I haven't used the mobile court or the accusation thing for years, because I know my authority now. I don't need to get a verdict from a judge. I know who I am. Therefore, I know how to use my authority to deal with any opposition. Back in the day, I didn't know who I was, and therefore I was coming into my identity, and therefore it helped me to deal with the things that were blocking my identity or had accusations against me because of my lack of knowledge and my lack of understanding of who I was. When I knew who I was, that deception wasn't able to function. Therefore, I didn't need to go to the judge and get a verdict, because I knew my verdict.
Right.
So I've used that less and less as I've matured into my identity. And it was part of my rite of passage in coming into sonship. When you're in sonship, I don't think you need that court in the same way. Of course, I've used other assemblies and courts which are judicial and legislative and are part of the kingdom's outworking and how to establish things and get things, put into the records of heaven and things like that legislatively, which I think still function. But again, even that, when you know who you are and as a son of God, you carry authority, you tend to just outwork that authority in a sort of everyday way, rather than, well, I'm going to go and get a law to enable me to do this. Well, actually, I'm a son. I have the laws on my half. And if I need to decree something, I can declare it right now. I don't need to go and get a law to help me declare it.
Yeah.
Whereas before I would go and establish something, but I was doing it on behalf of others as well. So they could use those laws because they probably didn't carry the same level of understanding of who they were. So, and that is valid in our journey. But ultimately, I think it becomes more relational the closer we get to the Father's heart, to outwork the Father's heart. And that's what I think I've discovered. When you're close and dwelling and abiding in the presence of the Father, he reveals his heart, infuses that knowledge to you, and your intentions and desires are aligned to his heart, which enables you to outwork his heart.
Right.
I was seeking to go and find his heart within the courtroom of heaven or within the court of judges or whatever. I was seeking to find his heart. That was before I was dwelling continually face to face in the realm of light and perfection, engaged with him heart to heart. So again, I think they were all relevant on my journey.
Right.
And they're relevant on other people's journey, because you've got to get there, in a sense. You've got to get where you already are. From God's perspective, you're already there. But there's a sort of a unfolding journey that gets you to understand who you actually are and where you're actually positioned.
Yeah, educational process. I was going to say you didn't need to use it for yourself, but you might use it for other people, because that's what I find is that it's important to take other people that haven't been through that journey to have them understand the mobile court.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because they may well need that to deal with things that are still affecting their understanding of who they are. Yeah.
Because it was where I learned about my own bloodline. I had to go there for my own bloodline for a couple years, to deal with it. And so, I find it still valuable, but that's true. I mean, I hadn't thought of it that way, that, that after you go through that and you know who you are, you don't actually need it as much. You can just make the declaration, because I mean, and I find, I'm sure you guys all are too, that as I said to a group of people the other day, I'm a son and I've been operating as a son for some years. They had no clue what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And then when I pray as a son, quote unquote, pray as a son or make declarations, I prefaced it with, this is going to sound different from how you pray, so that they wouldn't totally turn it off, that they could keep their minds open to it, and they go, yeah, that really is different. But they don't realize they're seated in heavenly places and can. So I mean, trying to be an evangelist for sonship is kind of an interesting challenge.
It is very
the whole world.
It is, yeah, because that is what people have been kept into the dark through religion, has kept them from sonship, because they have to be under a system.
Yeah.
Well, that system will keep them from their identity, so they have to keep relying on the system.
Well, it's also
people of the system,
I think it's also doctrines. It's the way they've been taught to think, and it's doctrines, and to come outside of that, I believe this. I'm like, okay, well, you can believe what you want, but truth is still truth, whether you believe it or not. So,
absolutely, anyway. Yeah. But we're all on that journey, and I have sympathy for where people are. So you have to have patience with people. I'm just glad God had patience with me as I was learning on my journey, and got it wrong lots of times, and was learning different things. But the key is to realize that it's progressive, and the revelation comes, then you don't need to keep operating in the old revelation when you have new, even if it was very helpful on the way. And some people get stuck in, well, this is the method. Well, it was the method for that season, but that may well change for the next season. Don't hang on to stuff which won't work in the next season as effectively.
Yeah, but they don't see it as a next season. I think that's another thing. People don't understand an age, and that we're at the end of an age and the beginning of the next, and they don't understand that. And so they don't see it. They've got to continue on there's still people living like the Jews did in Jesus' day today.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that never move on from, history things, and they're probably not going to, but they don't see it, because the church stops that as well. They don't even teach us what an age is and how to see it and how to know that it's coming. And so.
No, because they only see it in terms of their eschatological perspective of this age and the age to come, not realizing that the age to come is already here, and we're moving towards what God is doing in the future, because they're still looking forward to things happening which have already happened, which sort of ties people to, looking at the fulfillment of things that have already been fulfilled, and they get stuck.
And even sadder one is, I have a friend who's convinced that she's just a living soul. She doesn't know anything about being a spirit even. And I mean, because they take all these words so literally without going beyond that. And I'm like, well, yeah, we're a living soul, but we're in the image of the Father who's a spirit. So how does that work? Pull those things together. So anyway, thanks for that perspective about Jesus trying to, I don't know, bad word here, but talk people into coming into and realizing that there is a new covenant coming, or there was a new age coming, that he had a whole new perspective on that. That was good. I appreciate that. I'm working on that one.
Well, you answered my question concerning the angels. And just to make a comment, someone had told me that God killed thousands of people through an angel. And I would, no, that's scripture again. It says, look, I know now God never killed anybody. God didn't send that angel. Either the devil sent it, or man just assumed that that's what happened. And so I see people are still stuck in a lot of things. We have a lot of compassion for people who are still living there only because we're walking in God's grace and God's love now. It's a beautiful thing. And that's what we share. It's just the love of God.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I have a lot of patience and grace for people because I was there myself. I understand how difficult it is for deconstruction to take place. It's not easy. It's like we've been programmed by these doctrines and theological things for years and years if we've been around Christian things for a long time. I mean, I was going to church since I was 2, Sunday school and everything else. I mean, I absorbed a lot of things and I heard a lot of things and I was programmed by a lot of things, so it takes time for people to become deprogrammed. And if they don't have the experiences, it's really hard because an experience will challenge a belief. But if they don't have the experiences, then you're trying to change a belief with another belief. So they're just substituting beliefs, which aren't testimony. A belief in something is not a testimony of it. And people need to have testimonies of God's love, testimonies of engaging with God, experiencing him speaking to them, him giving them revelation, him showing them things which do totally challenge their theological perspective and their beliefs. See, if we try and challenge people's beliefs, all we do is upset them and anger them, unless we've got good relationship in which we can talk and share and debate and open things up. But generally, if our thing is, well, great, I'm going to go out there and change people's beliefs. I can't change someone's beliefs. I'll probably harden them in their belief if that's my attitude. So my attitude is to share my testimony of God's experience with me and my journey. And if people are on the same journey, they will come across that and it will be helpful for their journey. I don't want to connect with people who don't believe, because all I'll do is make them angry with me and then they'll call me a heretic or whatever else, because that's where they are. So I want to connect with people who will resonate when they're at the point where they need something to point them in the direction that God is taking them. So I don't want to get in arguments and theological arguments trying to prove people wrong, whatever, because it doesn't really work. And all you do is you harden people in their position. So we've got to demonstrate love so that they see there's something different about how we function, and help them when the time is right. And only do what we see the Father doing. And if the Father is not at that season in their life, we shouldn't try and force them into something that they're not ready for. So we've got to be quite sensitive about who we share and what we share with them to make sure we're not giving them something. Jesus talked about, they're not ready for strong meat, or Paul did about meat, about milk. They need milk and they're trying to eat strong meat. Well, they can't digest it. A baby at 3 months old cannot digest a steak, but they can digest milk. And Jesus said, look, there's so much I want you to know. I want to tell you about, but you're not ready for it yet. So I'm not able to, because you're not ready to digest it yet. So be sensitive to where people are and don't try and give them too much that will give them indigestion. Give them morsels and bites that will make them more hungry for more. I used to think if I didn't tell someone now, then I'm going to be responsible for them not knowing. Well, I'm not the Holy Spirit. Therefore, I'm not responsible for changing someone's mind or renewing their mind. That is a work of the Spirit. All I can do is be working with the Spirit at the right time with the right thing. So I don't need to tell them everything all in one go. I can be just sensitive. Sometimes I don't need to say anything. Sometimes people will ask me stuff. That's great. Then I can respond to their question. But even then, the response, I've got to be careful I don't go overboard. Right, there's an opportunity. Great, I'm in. And I spend the next 3 hours basically bashing them over the head with stuff. No, I'm not going to do that because it's not beneficial to them and won't be helpful. just be sensitive, I think, is the key in how we share and what we share when we share it.
Yeah,
Jesus didn't tell them all everything.
Yeah.
He did it as a progression.
I appreciate that, because when I'm talking to someone, I try to figure out where they're at. And I always say, if I'm sharing resources like Nancy and Ian and you, I'm like, you can't start with where he's at today. You have to start at the beginning. You have to go back to the beginning. Start where he was at the beginning. You can't take what he's had today, or else you'll think he's crazy. So yeah, so that's
absolutely true.
Yeah.
And it is really hard when you put stuff out.
Yeah.
Because when people look at our blog, it comes up with the latest blog post.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, actually, there's 300 posts before that's actually contributed to getting to this point.
Yeah.
Which people don't get, and it can be off-putting, which is why I don't want people looking at our material or hearing our material who aren't ready for it.
Yeah.
Because it's just counterproductive. It won't be helpful for them, and they'll often get offended because they've not been on the same journey yet.
Yeah.
But it's great to see it as a journey, because then you can see that it's okay for people to be where they are. As long as they're willing to move with God, then that's okay. I don't expect somebody who was where I was 10 years ago to know what I know now, or for me to try and get them to know what I know now. Now, there are some principles that I can give them that will be very helpful for their journey, particularly do it relationally. Keep the relational thing as the focus of that journey. That's helpful, because it will help them, because I've learned I can help to make their journey more comfortable, if you like. If there is a comfortable journey, it can certainly help them to discover that it works through relationship rather than systematic sort of formulas. I think we've been sort of conditioned to like formulas. If you do this, you'll get that. And even with the courts of heaven, it can become a bit of a formula. If you do this, this is going to be the result, and you will be free. Well, then people don't get free, and it didn't work. Well, no, you just got to apply it. It's like, if you have a verdict, use the verdict. Don't expect the fact that a verdict is given to just bring you instant success. Right. You got to apply it. You got to outwork it. You got to know it as part of you, for you to live according to it. Then you come into that freedom. But people were sold, I think, like lie busting and other things. It's almost, this is instant. Well, no, it's got to be applied. You got to live it out. You might get a breakthrough, but that breakthrough has got to be lived out on a daily basis. Expect that it may be tested.
One more really short question. Actually, I found online somebody posted the sessions of a conference you did in India a couple of years ago. Okay. And since I was on your beta group, that's a lot of material to start in engaging God and go through. That's a lot of hours and a lot of material. So I found this conference from India, and it seemed to me like, because I've listened to most of it, that it's like a compilation of everything that's in Engaging God. Would you agree? Would you agree with that? And it's a good place to start to send somebody if they want to overview, kind of.
Well, it was a conference about a specific topic that they wanted me to deal with, and it was sort of coming out of the sun's arise. So it was about sonship, and it was about coming into sonship. But I did deal with some specific stuff that they were struggling with, because there were some people there who turned up who really were being challenged by it. There were some word of faith people there, and then some others who really struggle with the whole eschatology thing, and they struggle with that. And I did a session on eschatology simply because there were so many questions being raised in it. But it was sort of a progressive thing, and a compilation of a little bit of Sun's Arise stuff that I put together for them, for the things they wanted me to do and cover. And it was to do with sort of ecclesia and how ecclesia was going to form and rise and different things, which were really, specific things that they asked me to do. But, I think, it was good fun. It was good sessions. I enjoyed them.
Is there quite a growing group of sons in India?
Yeah, there are. There are people who are really coming into some of those things, and there are sort of all over India, people who are beginning to come to that revelation. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Which is good.
That's good to know. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, okay. I'm going to leave it there.